All right, so welcome to this very first day of this special 30-day development content here. And what I want to do for the first day is sort of try to break down a little bit of the first scene that you see on the little teaser. And this is my Blender file. All the 3D animations and all that has been done in Blender. And so what you see here, and I'll go through some of this stuff, not everything, because a lot of this stuff this is a very basic scene, and there's just a few things that I want to go over. Originally, I really wanted to have a scene that is sort of like looking straight down. You know, you don't see any sky, and it's almost like coming out of the clouds, and we can see a little bit, sort of like a glimpse of what this place is, right? And I was playing a lot with sort of like the top down sort of view, and you can see that I have a couple cameras here. And the reason why I have a few is because I was playing with the uh, millimeters of the camera, the focal length of it, right? And so right now, if I'm on this view here and I go to press N, right now this camera has a 19 millimeter, which is a wide lens, and so that's why you can see that. You know, if I go to the top here, you can see a little bit of distortion on some of these lines here on the edge, right? And the perspective is like really pushed, so I can see a lot of the scene, right? And so if I go to the top view like this, you can see that it's sort of like warped on the corners here. And that's not really the view that I wanted, right? And so I experimented with a few, but I ended up going with a 100 mil, which is more of a narrow lens. And what that does is it sort of flattens the image the higher the number, right? And so now you can see that we see less, of course, but the distortion we don't see anymore. And so, like, for example, if I go more into a perspective, you can see that it looks quite different, right? Things look a little bit closer to each other, looks a little bit flatter than if I was on 19 mil. I zoom in, and now you can see a way bigger push difference between here. And so I ended up with a 100 mil camera, and that's why you can see that it's really high up here, right? And if I move the animation, you can see that it's sort of like moving. It's a very simple animation, just on the y-axis, just moving from one point to another. And so uh, I just set up how much I wanted of the scene to see, and how far from the buildings. And this seemed like a pretty good distance that we can see a lot of the terrain, some of the buildings, and maybe some of the stuff around the buildings, right? And you can see that we got some work in progress characters, sort of like walking and moving around. Now, originally I had a different animation for a camera going around this empty, but that's for a different shot. And so that's sort of how I set it up. And I use all the simple assets that you get from the kit, just some of the terrain stuff, which we'll talk about this week as well, how to create them, and sort of put them together. And I sort of built my scene based on the particular shot, right? And so I'm not too worried about what happens outside of the frame of the camera. I'm mostly concerned about what I see and how I see it here on the actual shot. So if I go a little bit higher here on the number, closer, right? I set up my lighting and I start seeing, okay, this sort of crater looks kind of cool here, and I put up a couple more here. I want to have some sort of like edge. It's almost like a big crater in the bigger picture, and this older, smaller craters around. And so with the lighting, I wanted to showcase also, because since we're looking straight down, it's very hard to see the forms because it's a little bit flat. And so you gotta use the lighting in a way that shows these shadows here, so you can actually appreciate and see the forms of the object, because it's not like if I'm on a perspective here where I can actually see it without lighting. And so it's a little bit harder to see the forms of things when you're either a straight down shot or like a completely and this is a wide angle, so you can see a little bit better, but on a narrower lens, it's a little bit harder to see those forms. So the lighting was pretty crucial to show that in here. Now, lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the effects, right, from the clouds, right? And so when we start here on frame 0, you can see that it's just mostly covering clouds. You can see a little bit of the um, terrain over here, and as it moves towards the center, you can see pieces of the clouds just going through the camera there to the frame, till they sort of like almost like revealing the scene in itself, right? And this was a very simple setup, and I like doing stuff like this without atmospheric volumes, just because volumes are just very hard on your rendering time in your computer. You can see that I have a atmosphere volume here, and I used it, I would say, in all of this of the scenes, and it was because it really gave me the mood that I was trying to go for. And so if I take the volume out just so you can see it here, let's see where we are. Atmospheric cube. Let's turn that off, and you can see how this looks, right? And it's almost like a color correction because it doesn't give me a lot of fog or anything like that. It was mostly because the colors that I was getting and sort of like the mood and the color correction, I was getting it from the volume here. And the volume is very low, so you don't see a lot of that. But the color that I was getting was just like perfect for it. It was really what I envisioned. And so, yes, I could have gone this way and maybe do some color correction in post, but I was getting it straight from here, and I knew I didn't have to do really anything in post. But back to the class, right? So the way I set it up, you can see that I have all these planes here, right? And these are planes that I sort of imported as clouds. I'm gonna do this on a different file here, right? And the way to do this is if you go to Shift A, Image, Mesh Plane, you can see that I have a folder with all these PNGs clouds that have opacity on the empty areas, right? And so when you import that and you use cycles, you can see that the plane has the opacity and it actually casts the shadow of the shape that you have on the plane, right? And if I turn this one off, if I get close like this, right, this will be the camera looking down. If I move the camera, you can see that it sort of like reveals what's down there. And so that's sort of how I set it up, but it wasn't just one, right? I have all these layers to kind of convey the density of the clouds in a sort of like a cheaper way without using volumes, and just to kind of create that sort of effect with the clouds in there. So again, this is a very simple setup, sort of like an easy, basic setup that you can do your scene. And I took the first one, so I got it to work on this first sort of section here, and then I duplicate them and flip them to the other side, because now on this side it sort of goes back, sort of like into the clouds again, just like you saw on the little trailer there. And so I sort of reused these and sort of went back into the other side. And so again, that's the very basics of this scene. Again, nothing complex to here, besides just copying some assets and pasting them and sort of building my scene based on my camera angle, right? And so that's sort of how I set this up for this scene. Now, on the next couple of days, we'll talk about other things, right? That we worked on, and some design things, and some 3D things, and some just development stuff. But just wanted to start with the very first scene that we see, and hopefully, I'll see you guys on the next days.